Okay, so I am Abdullah. I'm one of your technical leads at GTSC. I have multiple years of industry experience at multiple companies. I've seen the good and the bad in practices, and I'll be drawing upon these experiences. Additionally, I'm also overseeing the community projects for GDSC, and I've also been a past mentor. So I've seen a bunch of projects from start to finish. So I'll just be teaching you from my experience how things usually go. Um, this workshop, we will treat this as a knowledge session. I will go through my own developer experience from start to finish and expose you to different ideas. I won't cover everything in detail, but just enough for you to get exposure and be equipped with enough knowledge so you can pursue this later on your own time. We're going to set up two of the biggest bang for your buck automated code quality tools, in my opinion, which is Prettier and ESLint. Just an FYI for these, you will need VS Code. I'm going to be doing the demo on VS Code, but these are pretty universal tools. You can also find them for other code editors like PyCharm or uh, whatever. And then we can end with any questions you have for me. Okay. So software engineering, it's not all about writing code, especially at the enterprise level. The biggest challenge isn't writing code. That's kind of assumed that you're going to be writing code. Maintaining it is the challenge, and there's a lot of emphasis on maintaining coding standards, processes, making sure collaborative processes are in place. So it's easy to add additional features while working with like 10 other people on the project. Um, Here's the quote that I really like by Robert C. Martin. Code is read more than it's written. Especially in the industry, you spend more time reading code rather than writing it. And that means you need to be able to understand code effectively. And for that, people have to write good code. Uh, yeah, so it becomes extremely important to maintain good coding standards, especially if you're in a central team. And I say that because I was talking to my friend the other day. He works at Amazon, and he's part of this team that maintains this internal library that a lot of other teams at Amazon uses. So a lot of the times people, other developers come to his team for support and they'll be like, oh, this is not working. Like, oh, this is not happening the way it's supposed to be. And then, for example, he will have to go and dig deep into that code base that's written by someone else 10 years ago, some senior devs that are still in the company, but they've moved on to other projects. So he has to go there and like learn what's going on, really dig deep into the code, understand it, and then help the other people out. So it becomes really important that your coding standards are standardized. So coding standards. Without these, teams may struggle with messy code, inconsistent styles, debugging nightmares, and many, many more things. For example, can you imagine a PR where half the code uses tabs and the other half is using spaces? Uh, so a silly example, but can show you, like, for example, variable naming is, in my opinion, a better example if certain people are using certain sort of variable naming scheme and other are using different ones. Let's say camel case versus Pascal case or something. Um, so yeah, let's start with the journey. It usually all begins with this ticket, this a Jira ticket usually. Uh, that may say something like the green button doesn't work. It'll have a summary, it'll have acceptance criteria. And usually you want to make sure that at the end of the ticket, once you're done working on it, the acceptance criteria is true. So when clicking on the green button, it should show up on the center of the page. Um, once the ticket is made, it's often continued by a grooming session. Sometimes we also call this a refinement session. And I have a link here. You can like check this out later. This is where we refine the tickets. So all the developers get into this big meeting and we go to the backlog and we start refining tickets, whatever like needs refinement. So other developers will like add their insights, especially like senior devs. Uh, they may have like more perspective on what is needed for the ticket. For example, if I write a ticket and I say, okay, like we need unit tests for this, and then a senior dev may come in and be like, actually, no, this is a much bigger task. So you should also add end-to-end tests or like API tests or something like that. We also determine when we want to tackle this ticket. So like which sprint. We also want to determine the priority. This kind of goes hand in hand with when to do it. And story points, which is measured in complexity. Uh, we also do like a voting session at the end and decide the points for that. There's different schemes for story points. We use Fibonacci sequence. So we had 1, 2, 3, 5. And we also had 7, but we never went above 5. And even if we had a 5 ticket, which is supposed to be really complex, usually we want to break it down into threes. So if you have a ticket that's super complex, you want to break that down so it's not as complex, and then different people can tackle it in parallel. From that point on, someone will eventually pick the ticket up and begin working on it. Here's some process and tool that can help them. So Prettier, ESLint, and Git hooks. These can help you in the development stage when you're writing your code. So we're going to set up Prettier and ESLint later, but just a brief info on what they do. You have Prettier will auto format your code for you, so and it'll standardize it too. So everyone will have the same like Prettier standards, and when they save their code, whatever format they write it in, it's going to get formatted in a standard form. Like for example, you write your code on the left and you hit save, it's going to turn into that on the right side. So this is going to make sure that every single person has the same exact coding format. Then we have ESLint, which is more complex than just formatting based things. This is like going into, oh, you should use like a strict equality instead of a double equal sign. You should use double quotes. Some of these things may overlap with Prettier, but this can go even deeper than that. Like, oh, you should use this sort of naming convention. You should use your imports should be imported in a certain way. You shouldn't use hard-coded strings and stuff like that. So it'll give you warnings. And sometimes companies set it up so that when you try to when you try to push your code, it's not going to push until you resolve these issues, which is a good thing. Okay. And we're talking about ESLint, but linting is a general concept. So for Python, you might have some other linting tool. ESLint typically used for TypeScript and JavaScript. Okay, and then lastly, we have Git hooks. Often these are done with Husky. So when you're about to commit your code, you can trigger some pre-commit operations. So for example, you can use Husky and then it'll run your ESLinting and make sure that you have no linting errors. So before you even commit, it's going to check that you have no issues. And if you don't have any issues, you can commit your code. If you do have issues, you got to go back and fix it before you make a commit. So that's pre-commit. And at this stage, your Git indicates, of course, you should be using a branch for your features. And with your team, you should have decided already like what naming standards should be used for branches. In my company, we use something like you had like the type of change. So if you're adding a new feature, you have feature, and then the ticket number from Jira, and a small description, like 3, 4 words of what you're doing. You can have a bug branch. Starts with bug. Chore is like anything other like miscellaneous stuff, like maybe like you're upgrading a library or something or a package. And release, when you're releasing your code to production. Sometimes teams don't have like release branches. They have like continuous delivery, but ours had a release process. Don't name your branches after yourself. It's cringy. Commit messages. Typical commit messages will look like they will start with the ticket number, and then you give a small description of what you're doing. There are some conventions you can also look for this online, and these can be enforced. So one of the most annoying things was this one time I forgot to add the ticket number to my commit message, and I pushed it, and it didn't detect it at that point, and it got pushed. But then I couldn't merge my branch until I had to go back and do a bunch of stuff on Git, and like it would complain that you don't have the ticket number in the commit message and you can't, like that whole branch was just like screwed. I ended up fixing it, but it was such a pain. Um, So yeah, you can enforce these things. Um, so let's say you're done implementing the changes that you need for your ticket, and you push your changes onto GitHub and you create a pull request. Now we're into the CI/CD part. So usually teams will have a CI/CD process, continuous integration, continuous development. In the CI, you have your build, like it's going to try to build the project, make sure it actually builds, your unit test, your integration test, and any other tests, E2E. And then after that, once your code is reviewed and it's merged, it'll go to staging and then eventually to production. Usually it's deployed to staging before the review, and you expect it to test your code in staging as well. Okay, so example tools at this point, you might have GitHub Actions doing some of the deployment stuff for you, testing stuff for you. Our company used TeamCity for all our tests. So all our tests would be running in TeamCity, and then GitHub would get that information from TeamCity and then display it in the PR. And obviously you can merge your code unless all the test passes. Usually this was the most lengthiest part. Like every time I had push something, I want to merge it or even send it over for a review, I have to wait like 25-ish minutes for all the tests to go passing because there's like hundreds of thousands of tests actually at different stages. We also had a bunch of Jira automations. So every time, like if you push your code, like GitHub will tell Jira and then your ticket will get updated automatically. Usually there's some sort of log that goes into Slack, into a channel, and then other people can see what's going on. So you can also do stuff like that. And then, yeah, this is a very big list. Like obviously no company uses all of these, but these are just some examples of what sort of tools you can use at each stage. So for example, in the testing stage, there's so many tools. There's NUnit, JUnit for Java, PyTest, and then for deploy, you have a bunch of tools. So yeah, the list goes on and on. Logging is also a big stage of software engineering. I'm not going to cover that one, but this is also you see tools like Sentry and like New Relic. You might have like seen ads for these. Yeah, these tools are pretty important in the industry. Okay, and yeah, your changes are expected to come in with tests. So for each change you make, you need to make sure you have a minimum of unit tests. There are also different stages of testing. So there's unit tests, there's integration tests. The difference between unit tests and integration tests is with the unit test, you're isolating a component and just testing that directly. So if you're thinking of like a React component, you're isolating it from every other thing that it may depend on. So for that, you need to use mocks, and then you can use like mock functions to like isolate it, and just test the whole component in whole. With integration tests, you don't mock, you test the component as is, and you're making sure that multiple components together are working. API tests are just for your APIs. An end-to-end test, the most complex one, these actually deploy the application and then they automate they automate the user interaction. So they might click around on buttons and make sure that things actually work. These take the longest to run, and you don't want to have a lot of these, or you should only have these for like the full feature. So unit test for everything. That's why it's at the bottom of the triangle. Like it's the most of your tests should be here. Then you have integration tests, end-to-end tests. You don't want to have a lot of these because they do add a lot more time to your testing whenever the testing pipeline is running. And then UI tests are just like the human testing on its own time or whatever. Uh, you're expected to do all of these. Obviously, the UI test you should always do. Unit test you should always do. Integration and end-to-end may depend. So once your testing pipeline and your build has passed, your changes are typically deployed to a staging environment. And this is just a dev environment where you can test your changes before it goes to prod. So here you can like load up your whole app. You should make sure everything works smoothly. And then once changes are approved, this can go into prod. We actually had another stage. So once you merge it, it will go into a UAT environment, which is very similar. Like they try to mimic prod. It would sometimes use like fake prod data. just so it's like as close as possible to prod. And so when we push into prod, there's no problems. When it comes to pull requests, I think the biggest thing that helped me out to get less comments on my requests was reviewing my own code. So review your own code before you assign someone. That'll just make their lives easy. You don't want your senior dev time like being wasted on like silly mistakes. Obviously, like they have a lot more like important things to do. So you want to try to minimize that and try to make the review process for your team as easy as possible. So just try to find your mistakes ahead of time and think of them when you're assigning them. And then once your code is approved, you can merge it. For us, like I mentioned, once you merge it, it gets deployed to a UAT environment. We further test our code there. And then we had a release slot, and then we would just like, I think we had Tuesday and Thursday, we would have release slots and we could release our code and then it would go to prod. And once you do that, you test it again because now it's live to like millions of customers. So you want to make sure like nothing is broken. Usually it's not because UAT is pretty good. Yeah, and then once you're done, you move the ticket from in progress to done. And the cycle repeats, you pick up a new ticket. And yeah, any question about this so far? If not, we can move on to setting up Prettier on VS Code. So this can be you can just follow along with me. I'll wait for you to like catch up and stuff. So just open up your VS Code and I'll share my other screen and then we can go from there. Okay, so I already created like a folder. Cursor. I haven't heard of that. Oh, the IDE, the AI IDE. I haven't used it myself, but it sounds pretty cool. I'll have to try it out still. I'm trying to stay away from AI a bit for now. I feel like with AI, it's just like when I code with AI, it's just making me dumb. And I feel like the things I used to like naturally be able to do, I'm like super reliant. So I'm gonna try to stay away unless I am doing something for like at work and I need to get stuff done fast, then I'll use AI. But for now, I'll just try to stay away. Okay, so I'm just gonna give you guys like a minute to also like create a project or something and open it up. Okay. Um, okay, so let's continue. So the first thing you should do is you should download the Prettier extension. So if you go on your extensions, uh, Prettier, I already have it. So you can go here, you can install it. And then once you have it installed, you need to configure it as your default formatter. So once you install this, you can do Control Shift X or Command Shift X. Um, let's go here. Oh, that's for the command comma, I think. Yeah, and then you can search for uh, default formatter. And make sure you select Prettier as your default formatter. And then search for format on save. And just make sure you enable that. So every time you hit save, it's going to auto format um, your code. Let me just look at the chat if there's anything. Yeah, I'll give you guys like a minute to do that because it may take some time to actually install Prettier. And feel free to ask any questions on the chat. Let's wait until like 11:32. So the two things you have to do are open up this. You can open this by command comma or control comma. I'll type that in. And then make sure format on save is enabled, and the default formatter is Prettier. Okay, moving on. Another thing I'll do is I'm just going to add Prettier as a development dependency so that whenever someone tries to use our project, uh, Prettier already gets installed for them, and they can also go ahead and like use our Prettier config. So for this, I would say do npm install save dev and Prettier, and I'll copy this over as well. Send it to you guys. Okay, so just wait for that. And then once that's added, you can make a Prettier config file. So for that, it's .prettier rc. And this is where you define all your Prettier rules. So let me just paste that in here. The command, and then .prettier rc is the file name. Guys following along so far? If you need more time, let me know. In the meantime, I'm just going to create like a sample JavaScript file you can test on. I'm just write some random stuff. Sure. Oh, you see my Prettier already went into because I already have it config. But I'll see how to override it if you saw that it changed quickly. Okay, so just also make a sample file that you want to test your code on or test your format on. Okay, and let's just add some Prettier config. So for this, you can use Google to find some. There's like pre-made stuff already, so you can find those standards. We can use something simple, so maybe I can do like single quotes to true, and then we can not trailing comma. Um, Actually, yeah, but no. And what else? Oh, tab spaces. Tab bit, I think. Yeah, that one is the next one. So let's change that to 2. Um, okay, so now that I have that, I'll try make some change here. So what do I have? I have single quote is true. So this should, it's being overridden, I think. So when you hit save, at least on your screen, it should change your double quote into single quote. Um, and your tab bit to 2. So for now, it's for me, I have 2 here. Uh, I think I have pre-existing config, so I already have 2, so that's going to change to 2. But the codes are not changing because of my pre-existing config. Shouldn't happen for you guys though. So I'll wait for you guys to try that. In the meantime, let's see if I can maybe change my config. Oh, maybe it's a typo actually. Okay, yeah. So it was a typo. So single quote, not single quotes. I have trailing comma on tab bit 2. Okay, so now let's change this back to a double quote. Okay, and you see when I hit save, it changes to single quote. So all your quotes are going to be single quotes, and this is going to be consistent for everyone. You can also change it, so you can change tab bit to 4, for example, here. And then see now when I hit save, I have 4 space tab instead of like 2 spaces tab. So yeah, did you guys have luck with this? In the meantime, I'll give you guys some time. In the meantime, I'm going to look for some Prettier templates on Google. Also, here's the link for Prettier if you want to read the docs. So, do you want me to move on to ESLint, or do you still need more time playing with this? ESLint? Okay. Let me just. Here's one I found uh, for the Prettier config. You can find like these online. There's a bunch of these. So you can maybe search up, oh, I'm like working on a React project. What are some Prettier configs I can use? You can also use like ChatGPT to generate these for you. So lots of ways. For now, let's move on to ESLint, which will give you hint like it's gonna detect errors before they happen and warn you about them. So for that, you wanna make sure you install ESLint. on your, oops, on your code editor. So ESLint, I already have it. So just install that. And once you have that, we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to save this as a dependency. And, ESLint. And I'm just going to copy that command over. Just put in the chat. Okay, and so for this one, it's a bit more involved. You need to set it up, and you can do that by doing npx ESLint init. Also, feel free to follow the documentation for this. They have good documentation and help guide you through the setup. I don't know if you can see this, but I'll just zoom in. So yeah, sometimes Prettier and ESLint can conflict. So typically you would set up your there's some templates where you make sure that whatever the Prettier configs are, they're not interfering with your ESLint configurations. So you have to be a bit careful about that. You don't want like ESLint to do one thing and then Prettier to do another one, because one of them will have like precedence over the other. If you're talking about a specific extension, then yeah, probably like it's probably solving the problem that I just talked about. Uh, but for now, I'm just gonna set these up separately. Okay, and yeah, that's the other command. Okay, so I'm just gonna do that. My check syntax only, check syntax and find problems. Uh, JavaScript. Currently we're not using any of these. But typically you would select JavaScript modules for like React projects and stuff. And none of these. And we're not using TypeScript as well. And our let's just say browser, because I don't have no setup. And yes, install this. npm. Yeah, I think I just selected all the defaults. So once you have that, you should see a bunch of ESLint files. And then you can open up ESLint. And actually, I think you need to create an ESLint JSON file. JSON. I'll wait for you guys to move on to the next step. Just give you like a minute or so. For ESLint also, there's like a lot of templates. So I think the most common one is called Airbnb template. Research that. So there's like configs you can find online. This one is pretty common, the Airbnb one. Okay, for now, I'm just gonna do something simple. I'm just gonna copy this over here. And again, you can also use ChatGPT to like generate rules for you as well, if needed. And then we'll save these. So you see how I'm pretty already formatted this properly. So I have browser true, yes, 2021. So recommend. So this is actually extending one of the recommended rules for ESLint. You can install other rules like Airbnb one, and then you can extend that one as well. And then here you can define some custom rules. Um, if I have time, I'll go over some of the ESLint configurations for some of the other projects I've seen. But for now, we say like like if you have a codes, uh, if they're not double, then you should get an error. Semicolon, you need to always have it, otherwise you get an error. Okay, so save that, and then I think you just run ESLint. So I got a bunch of errors when I ran npx lint dot. So that's basically running the linter on all your code. So for that, it's saying act. Okay, so since I didn't define it, it's complaining about that. And see how we didn't define this rule, no undef, but it's a default rule that comes because of the extension here. So let's just quickly define these here, and then run that again. Okay, y is assigned a value. Oh yeah, it's not even. Oh, this I didn't even use y. That was my bad. So see, this can really help you out sometimes. And I'll just save that. Yeah, I have no errors now. What was one of the other rules I had in here? So codes, um, let's use like double codes here. Oh, because Prettier already, yeah. So yeah, sometimes Prettier will help you out and you won't have to worry about some of the things. You see, Prettier also adds that for me. So that wouldn't work either. Let me see if there's another rule I can try and add and break and show you an example. Maybe this one. This should, yeah. So if I use a double equal sign, this should complain about that. Oh no, it didn't. That's not a default rule. So for that, let me search up a rule. Yes, then do you guys have your ESLint training so far? And can you guys see like at least like the basic ones like no defining X is not defined issue, for example? Okay, so the one for this, it's called EQ, EQ, EQ. It's like this. Q, and then you have error always. It's not detecting it. I think it's just using the default rules. Might be a conflict with my extension because I have like other stuff set up already. Uh, but for you, it should work. Let me know if it doesn't. But yeah, you can define your custom rules here. And then you can also extend multiple other ones. So you can extend the Airbnb one. Um, Another thing it can also do for you is it can auto fix. So for example, if I remove these because these we know breaks. So let's do that. So we have the errors here, and then you can try to auto fix it by doing npx ESLint and then fix. In this case, it didn't do it, but if it's something like an equal sign, if you're complaining about an equal sign, it will just automatically change it for you. I guess this is a bit more complex because there's multiple ways of defining it, so it doesn't do that. But yeah, these two tools can really make things very standardized and uh, just make sure everyone is writing code the same way, and common standards are just enforced automatically, and no one has to review about these things. Like you don't have to worry about single quotes, tab spaces, and other things during your review. You can kind of assume that yeah, like these are being followed. Um, Unless, of course, when the developer is setting it up, they don't set up these tools properly. Um, but yeah, you should have a process for all that. Um, so since you have 10 minutes, another thing I didn't mention is your knowledge bases. Those are also pretty important in the industry. So typically we use Confluence and then you write a lot of documentation there. This is usually about your conventions and stuff and what sort of um, like your any sort of research you do goes in there. You guys, if you're doing personal projects, I would recommend using GitHub Wiki. It's a similar tool, but it's free. Another thing I want to mention is about comments. So for example, I have this code, right? It's like let x equals 5, and then let x equals 10. And now I want to have like a sum or something. Let's not equal x plus y. And I just write a comment, sums x plus y. This is actually like it's considered tech debt. This is not good. You shouldn't comment things that are self-explanatory, and these would get detected in your code review by a developer, and they'd be like, "Why are you commenting? This is pretty obvious that this is the sum." I see a lot of times people add comments per code, which are like the code already like it makes sense. You don't need an English statement saying that this is a sum. Also, just make sure that your code, it should be like English. Like when you're reading your code, it should be very easy to follow along. A lot of times people try to do very complex things, like they would sacrifice readability in terms of conciseness. And that, in my opinion, that's not good. You should emphasize readability so that whoever's reading your code, it's very easy for them to follow along. Then just do something a very super complicated way that someone has to like spend 5 minutes understanding what you're exactly doing. Uh, but yeah, in that case, if you do really want to do that, you have to add a comment then. But for other self-explanatory stuff, you don't need to add like those sort of comments. Um, yeah. Any questions for me? Yeah, you're welcome. I'll stick around until 12, and if you have any questions, be happy to take them on.